So Michael and I, while we were in studio together, thought that we would touch for just a few minutes on a topic that we're not saying that there's some great solution to right now, but I think needs to be discussed a little further. And that is the Supreme Court, as you may have heard on my show Trending a couple weeks ago, is getting ready to hear a case that will have to do with employment of individuals and whether or not you can hire or fire based on an ethics code, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of issues. Let's give the specific context of Catholic schools, where it might be a teacher who is living in an openly gay relationship and they're a teacher of young children, and people find that problematic, and there may be a letting go of that educator in the school system because of the example being shown to the children. So we want to talk to those situations a little bit today.
Sure.
So you coming from the perspective, and I'm sharing this because you've been sharing your story on Trending, you in the past have experienced same-sex attraction, you've struggled with pornography addiction, you understand that you have a place in the church still and you're called to chastity.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, you also work within the church as a confirmation director, correct?
Yep.
Saint
Anastasia.
Saint Anastasia. So I want to hear your perspective on this issue and whether or not it's okay in some circumstances, and I think it's situational, to hire or fire based on certain behaviors that are being lived out.
Yeah, I think that the first thing to say is no one is saying that people who identify as part of the LGBT community are incapable of teaching, right? Or incapable of having positive influence in people's lives. There was a great, fantastic teacher at my public school in Texas who I adored in high school. She was a vice principal and now is the principal of my alma mater in Coppell, Texas, who's an amazing woman who I believe has been very public about her same-sex relationship and has a fantastic influence in a lot of ways on the children and the members of that community. However, she's working in a public school system. In a private school system, if you have an ethics code that acknowledges that there's sexual morality that exists according to biblical and Catholic understanding, why should it not be within the rights of that community and that school to hire based on people who will exemplify to the best of their ability those codes? I think that is a question worth discerning more. And we've discussed a little bit before we talked on air here that there are certain positions, perhaps even within a school, that may be more problematic than others. And if somebody is openly in a gay relationship and teaching religion, for instance, a good question is, how are they able to reconcile their conscience with that position? And is that going to then inform the way they teach religion? Are they going to truly be able to articulate the church's position in a way that adheres to church teaching? Or further, is their lifestyle alone a contradiction enough to create confusion among the children?
And even confusion among themselves about certain areas of theology that they're still trying to grapple with.
I deal with same-sex attraction, right? We talked about this. And, I still deal with it some. And so if I'm in a school system where I'm told that this is disordered and I'm called to try to live out the church's teachings, and my teacher is in an openly gay relationship at the Catholic school, that would quite honestly sow quite a bit of confusion in me as a young person as why it mattered. Why should I care what the church has to say on this issue?
If they're living that out, yeah, I'm trying to live a chaste lifestyle. Well, maybe that's not necessary. I can just be Catholic and gay. But here's a distinction people need to remember. Gay is a lifestyle, right?
Sure.
It's not an identity. And there are a lot of people who experience same-sex attraction, such as yourself, who are not living a gay lifestyle.
Correct. Yes.
And so that's, I think, a really important distinction where you yourself acknowledge that if someone's a school teacher, a choir director, and they're in an openly gay relationship, that's creating cause for scandal of what is morally correct and incorrect if it's inconsistent with the teachings of the church.
I agree with that, and I want to add the caveat that we've discussed as well, which is every sign of unjust discrimination should be avoided, and this I'm quoting the Catechism, so it should be avoided towards people who have homosexual tendencies or even homosexual behaviors. We want to avoid discrimination. That means that if a school has a sexual morality policy, they should be concerned with how that is applied to their staff, not just members of their staff who have homosexual issues. Yeah. And what that looks like is a pastoral decision for each church, each school. So I don't have a perfect answer on how to do that, but I do know that to avoid the issue altogether and bury our heads in the sand is not necessarily fair to the students.
Right.
And that's who we should be most concerned with at the school, are the students.
Right. And it's coming from the perspective of the students, as you're saying. It's not, we hate you, we hate what you're living. That's not what these schools are teaching. And unfortunately, if there are some people who have that mindset, they're not standing for the overall principle of the students, which is the ultimate reason why there might be a termination of employment. Just like there have been terminations of employment for people who have openly discussed that they just had an abortion, they're in education in a Catholic school, or they are living with someone that they're not married to and engaging in sexual relationships.
And I think a good question here for all of us is, are we willing to have this conversation with an openness to discerning the Holy Spirit's role in these decisions and being careful about how quickly we throw stones at other people?
Right.
Because we do know that Jesus Christ asked, he who has not sinned to throw the first stone. So we do want to engage in this in a way that is patient, because if we have truth on our side, we need not be a clanging gong. We must speak it with love. And that includes seeing the person who we are talking about here, maybe it's somebody in an openly gay marriage at a school, talking about them, remembering their dignity and value is not diminished because of their dissent from church teaching, but it doesn't mean that their employment should be guaranteed necessarily at the school if they're not willing to abide by the code of conduct.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being with me. I wanted to just kind of scratch the surface on getting more people to think about this, because we're going to see it at the level of the Supreme Court, but the reality is we have to kind of address how we think about this and recognize that there's also context. Maybe it's a school janitor who's not talking about his relationship with someone who's of the same sex, and maybe that person shouldn't necessarily be directly fired unless he's causing talking to the kids about it all the time. This is situational as well, but there's a moral standard and level of exposure and the importance of not causing scandal that has to be remembered.
And let us also, last thing I'll say about this, I guess, is remember that often people in the church, including Pope Francis, but Pope Benedict, Pope John Paul II, have encouraged us, and Jesus Christ himself, to first start by looking within. Find it within ourselves, to pause, to look within, to check in with Jesus Christ, ask for the discernment of the Holy Spirit, and make sure we are addressing these issues without isolating things to such a comfortable and perfectly cookie cutter scenario that we can discard or dismiss people too easily. And I just think that's important to remember.
Absolutely. While still upholding the moral standard at the same time,
Absolutely.
not compromising with
we
the
don't
church
have to
teaches.
compromise what the church teaches, but the church teaches to do all things with love.
Yes, absolutely. That's Michael Gasparro from the Breakthrough Clinic. You can also find him at reintegrativetherapy.com as well. He just joined Trending for 2 episodes. You can find them at radiotrending.com. Great insight as a marriage and family therapist teaching them these issues. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.